Section 11 of the Letters of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Volume 1, by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, translated by Lady Wallace. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Fourth part, Munich, Idomeneo, November 1780 to January 1781. Mozart now remained stationary at Salzburg till the autumn of 1780, highly dissatisfied at being forced to waste his youthful days in inactivity, and in such an obscure place, but still as busy as ever. A succession of grand instrumental compositions were the fruits of this period: 2 masses, some vespers, the splendid music for König Thomas, and the operetta Zaide for Schikaneder. At length, however, to his very great joy, a proposal was made to him from Munich to write a grand opera for the Carnival of 1781. It was Idomeneo, König von Greta. At the beginning of November he once more set off to Munich in order to prepare an exact fit, on the spot, of the different songs in the opera for the singers, and to rehearse and practice everything with them. The Abbate Baresco in Salzburg was the author of the libretto, in which many an alteration had yet to be made, and these were all to be effected through the intervention of the father. 126. Munich, November 8, 1780. Fortunate and pleasant was my arrival here. Fortunate because no mishap occurred during the journey, and pleasant because we had scarcely patience to wait for the moment that was to end this short but disagreeable journey. I do assure you it was impossible for us to sleep for a moment the whole night. The carriage jolted our very souls out, and the seats were as hard as stone. From Wasserburg I thought I never could arrive in Munich with whole bones, and during 2 stages I held on by the straps, suspended in the air, and not venturing to sit down. But no matter, it is past now, though it will serve me as a warning in future rather to go on foot than drive in a diligence. Now as to Munich. We arrived here at 1 o'clock in the forenoon, and the same evening I called on Count Seau, the theatre intendant, but as he was not at home, I left a note for him. Next morning I went there with Becca. Seau has been molded like wax by the Mannheim people. I have a request to make of the Abbate Giambattista Varesco. The aria of Ilia in the 2nd act and 2nd scene must be a little altered for what I require. Se il padre perde, in te lot ritrovo. This verse could not be better, but now comes what always appeared unnatural to me. N.B. In an aria, I mean to speak aside. In a dialogue, these things are natural enough, for a few words can be hurriedly set aside, but in an aria, where the words must be repeated, it has a bad effect. And even were this not the case, I should prefer an uninterrupted aria. The beginning may remain if he chooses, for it is charming and quite a natural flowing strain. Or not being fettered by the words, I can write on quite easily, for we agreed to bring in an aria andantino here in concert with 4 wind instruments, viz. Flute, hautboy, horn, and bassoon, and I beg that you will let me have the air as soon as possible. Now for a grievance. I have not, indeed, the honor of being acquainted with the hero del Prato, the musico, who was to sing Idomante, but from description I should say that Ceccarelli is rather the better of the 2, for often in the middle of an air a musico's breath entirely fails. Nota bene, he never was on any stage, and Raff is like a statue. Now only for a moment imagine the scene in the 1st act, but there is one good thing, which is that Madame Dorothea Wendling is archicontentissima with her Senna, and insisted on hearing it played 3 times in succession. The Grand Master of the Teutonic Order arrived yesterday. Essex was given at the Court Theatre, and a magnificent ballet. The theatre was all illuminated. The beginning was an overture by Cannabich, which, as it is one of his last, I did not know. I am sure, if you had heard it, you would have been as much pleased and excited as I was, and if you had not previously known the fact, you certainly could not have believed that it was by Cannabich. Do come soon to hear it, and to admire the orchestra. I have no more to say. There is to be a grand concert this evening, where Mara is to sing 3 airs. Tell me whether it snows as heavily in Salzburg as here. My kind regards to Herr Schikaneder, impresario in Salzburg, and beg him to excuse my not yet sending him the aria, for I have not been able to finish it entirely. 127. Munich, November 13th, 1780. I write in the greatest haste, for I am not yet dressed, and must go off to Count Seau's. Cannabich, Quaglio, and Legrand, the ballet master, also dine there to consult about what is necessary for the opera. Cannabich and I dined yesterday with Countess Baumgartner. Footnote: he wrote an air for her, the original of which is now in the State Library at Munich, nay, Lerchenteld. My friend is all in that family, and now I am the same. It is the best and most serviceable house here to me, for owing to their kindness all has gone well with me, and please God will continue to do so. I am just going to dress, but must not omit the chief thing of all, and the principal object of my letter, to wish you, my very dearest and kindest father, every possible good on this your named day. I also entreat the continuance of your fatherly love, and assure you of my entire obedience to your wishes. Countess Larose sends her compliments to you and my sister, so do all the Cannabichs and both Wendling families, Ram, Eckfather, and son Becca, and Herr del Prato, who happens to be with me. Yesterday Count Seo presented me to the Elector, who was very gracious. If you were to speak to Count Seo now, you would scarcely recognize him, so completely have the Mannheimers transformed him. I am ex commissione to write a formal answer in his name to the Abate Varesco, but I have no time, and was not born to be a secretary. In the first act, 8th scene, Herr Quaglio made the same objection that we did originally, namely, that it is not fitting the king should be quite alone in the ship. If the Abbe thinks that he can be reasonably represented in the terrible storm, forsaken by everyone, without a ship, exposed to the greatest peril, all may remain as it is, but N.B. no ship, for he cannot be alone in one. So, if the other mode be adopted, some generals or confidants, mates, must land from the ship with him. Then the king might address a few words to his trusty companions, and desire them to leave him alone, which in his melancholy situation would be quite natural. The second duet is to be omitted altogether, and indeed with more profit than loss to the opera, for if you will read the scene, it evidently becomes cold and insipid by the addition of an air or a duet, and very irksome to the other actors, who must stand by all the time unoccupied. Besides, the noble contest between Ilia and Idomeneo would become too long, and thus lose its whole interest. Mara has not the good fortune to please me. She does too little to be compared to Bastaradella, see number 8, yet this is her peculiar style, and too much to touch the heart like a Weber, Aloysia, or any judicious singer. P.S. Apropos, as they translate so badly here, Count Seo would like to have the opera translated in Salzburg, and the arias alone to be in verse. I am to make a contract that the payment of the poet and the translator should be made in one sum. Give me an answer soon about this. Adieu. What of the family portraits? Are they good likenesses? Is my sister's begun yet? The opera is to be given for the first time on the 26th of January. Be so kind as to send me the 2 scores of the masses that I have with me, and also the Mass in B. Count Seo is to mention them soon to the Elector. I should like to be known here in this style also. I have just heard a Mass of Gruans. It would be easy to compose 6 such in a day. Had I known that this singer, Del Prato, was so bad, I should certainly have recommended Ceccarelli. 128. Munich, November 15th, 1780. The aria is now admirable, but there is still an alteration to be made recommended by Raff. He is, however, right, and even were he not, some courtesy ought to be shown to his gray hairs. He was with me yesterday, and I played over his first aria to him, with which he was very much pleased. The man is old, and can no longer show off in an aria like that in the second art, Fuor del mar, Ho un mare and senno, etc., as moreover, in the third act, he has no aria. The one in the first act, not being so cantabile as he would like, owing to the expression of the words. He wishes, after his last speech, O creta fortunata, o mi felice, to have a pretty aria to sing instead of the quartet. In this way a superfluous air would be got rid of, and the third act produced a far better effect. In the last scene, also of the second act, Idomeneo has an aria, or rather a kind of cavatina, to sing between the choruses. For this it would be better to substitute a mere recitative, well supported by the instruments, for in this scene, owing to the action and grouping which have been recently settled with Legrand, the finest of the whole opera, there cannot fail to be such a noise and confusion in the theatre that an aria would make a very bad figure in this place, and moreover there is a thunderstorm which is not likely to subside during Raff's aria. The effect, therefore, of a recitative between the choruses must be infinitely better. Liesl Wendling has also sung through her 2 arias half a dozen times, and is much pleased with them. I heard from a third person that the 2 Wendlings highly praised their arias, and as for Raff, he is my best and dearest friend. I must teach the whole opera myself to Del Prato. He is incapable of singing even the introduction to any air of importance, and his voice is so uneven. He is only engaged for a year, and at the end of that time, next September, Count Seel will get another. Ceccarelli might try his chance then seriously. I nearly forgot the best of all. After Mass last Sunday, Count Seel presented me, en passant, to H.S.H. the Elector, who was very gracious. He said, "I am happy to see you here again," and on my replying that I would strive to deserve the good opinion of His Serene Highness, he clapped me on the shoulder, saying, "Oh, I have no doubt whatever that all will go well. Ah, piano, piano, si va lontano." Deuce take it, I cannot write everything I wish. Raff has just left me. He sends you his compliments, and so do the Cannabicks and Wendlings and Rahm. My sister must not be idle, but practice steadily, for everyone is looking forward with pleasure to her coming here. My lodging is in the Burggasse at M. Fiat's, where the marble slab to his memory is now erected. 129. Munich, November 22nd, 1780. I send herewith, at last, the long-promised aria for Herr Schikaneder. During the first week that I was here, I could not entirely complete it, owing to the business that caused me to come here. Besides, Legrand, the ballet master, a terrible talker and bore, has just been with me, and by his endless chattering caused me to miss the diligence. I hope my sister is quite well. I have at this moment a bad cold, which in such weather is quite the fashion here. I hope and trust, however, that it will soon take its departure. Indeed, both phlegm and cough are gradually disappearing. In your last letter you write repeatedly, "Oh, my poor eyes! I do not wish to write myself blind. 8:30 at night, and no spectacles? But why do you write at night, and without spectacles? I cannot understand it. I have not yet had an opportunity of speaking to Count Seel, but hope to do so today, and shall give you any information I can gather by the next post. At present all will, no doubt, remain as it is. Herr Raff paid me a visit yesterday morning, and I gave him your regards, which seemed to please him much. He is indeed a worthy and respectable man. The day before yesterday, Del Prato sang in the most disgraceful way at the concert. I would almost lay a wager that the man never manages to get through the rehearsals, far less the opera. He has some internal disease. Come in, Herr Panizaki, who is to sing Arbace. He has already paid me 3 visits, and has just asked me to dine with him on Sunday. I hope the same thing won't happen to me that happened to us with the coffee. He meekly asks if, instead of ce, la, sa, he may sing ce, so, la, or even ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la. I am so glad when you often write to me, only not at night, and far less without spectacles. You must, however, forgive me if I do not say much in return, for every minute is precious. Besides, I am obliged chiefly to write at night, for the mornings are so very dark. Then I have to dress, and the servant at the visor sometimes admits a troublesome visitor. When Del Prato comes, I must sing to him, for I have to teach him his whole part like a child. His method is not worth a farthing. I will write more fully next time. What of the family portraits? My sister, if she has nothing better to do, might mark down the names of the best comedies that have been performed during my absence. Has Schikaneder still good receipts? My compliments to all my friends, and to Gilofsky's Cotterell. Give a pinch of Spanish snuff from me to Pimperel, the dog, a good wine sop, and 3 kisses. Do you not miss me at all? 1,000 compliments to all. All adieu. I embrace you both from my heart, and hope my sister will soon recover. Nannerl, partly owing to her grief in consequence of an unfortunate love affair, was suffering from pains in the chest, which threatened to turn to consumption. 1:30. Munich, November 24th, 1780. I beg you will convey to Mademoiselle Catherine Gilofsky de Uwazawa my respectful homage. Wish her in my name every possible happiness on her name day. Above all, I wish that this may be the last time I congratulate her as Mademoiselle. What you write to me about Count Seinsheim is done long ago. They are all links of one chain. I have already dined with him once, and with Baumgartner twice, and once with Lerchenfeld, father of Mademoiselle Baumgarten. Not a single day passes without some of these people being at Cannabix. Do not be uneasy, dearest father, about my opera. I do hope that all will go well. No doubt it will be assailed by a petty cabal, which will, in all probability, be defeated with ridicule, for the most respected and influential families among the nobility are in my favor, and the first-class musicians are one and all from me. I cannot tell you what a good friend Cannabich is, so busy and active. In a word, he is always on the watch to serve a friend. I will tell you the whole story about Mara. I did not write to you before on the subject, because I thought that, even if you knew nothing of it, you would be sure to hear the particulars here. But now it is high time to tell you the whole truth, for probably additions have been made to the story. At least, in this town, it has been told in all sorts of different ways. No one can know about it better than I do, as I was present, so I heard and witnessed the whole affair. When the first symphony was over, it was Madame Mara's turn to sing. I then saw her husband come sneaking in behind her with his violoncello in his hand. I thought she was going to sing an aria obbligato with violoncello accompaniment. Old Dancy, the first violoncello, also accompanies well. All at once, Teschke, who is a director but has no authority when Cannabich is present, said to Dancy, N.B., his son-in-law, "Rise and give Mara your place." When Cannabich saw and heard this, he called out, "Dancy, stay where you are. The elector prefers his own people playing the accompaniments." Then the air began, Mara standing behind his wife, looking very sheepish, and still holding his violoncello. The instant they entered the concert room, I took a dislike to both, for you could not well see 2 more insolent-looking people, and the sequel will convince you of this. The aria had a second part, but Madame Mara did not think proper to inform the orchestra of the fact previously, but after the last ritournelle came down into the room, with her usual air of effrontery, to pay her respects to the nobility. In the meantime, her husband attacked Cannabich. I cannot write every detail, for it would be too long, but in a word, he insulted both the orchestra and Cannabich's character, who, being naturally very much irritated, laid hold of his arm, saying, "This is not the place to answer you." Mara wished to reply, but Cannabich threatened that if he did not hold his tongue, he would have him removed by force. All were indignant at Mara's impertinence. A concerto by Ramm was then given, when this amiable couple proceeded to lay their complaint before Count Seo. But from him also, as well as from everyone else, they heard that they were in the wrong. At last Madame Mara was foolish enough to speak to the elector himself on the subject, her husband in the meantime saying in an arrogant tone, "My wife is at this moment complaining to the elector. An unlucky business for Cannabich. I am sorry for him." But people only burst out laughing in his face. The elector, in reply to Madame Mara's complaint, said, "Madame, you sang like an angel, although your husband did not accompany you," and when she wished to press her grievance, he said, "That is Count Seo's affair, not mine." When they saw that nothing was to be done, they left the room, although she had still 2 airs to sing. This was nothing short of an insult to the elector, and I know for certain that, had not the Archduke and other strangers been present, they would have been very differently treated. But on this account Count Seo was annoyed, so he sent after them immediately, and they came back. She sang her 2 arias, but was not accompanied by her husband. In the last one, and I shall always believe that Herr Mara did it on purpose, 2 bars were wanting. N.B. Only in the copy from which Cannabich was playing. When this occurred, Mara seized Cannabich's arm, who quickly got right, but struck his bow on the desk, exclaiming audibly, "This copy is all wrong." When the aria was at an end, he said, "Herr Mara, I give you one piece of advice, and I hope you will profit by it. Never seize the arm of the director of an orchestra, or lay your account with getting at least half a dozen sound boxes on the ear." Mara's tone was now, however, entirely lowered. He begged to be forgiven and excused himself as he best could. The most shameful part of the affair was that Mara, a miserable violoncellist all here declare, would never have been heard at court at all, but for Cannabich, who had taken considerable trouble about it. At the first concert, before my arrival, he played a concerto and accompanied his wife, taking Dancy's place without saying a word, either to Dancy or anyone else, which was allowed to pass. The elector was by no means satisfied with his mode of accompanying, and said he preferred his own people. Cannabich, knowing this, mentioned to Count Seau, before the concert began, that he had no objection to Mara's playing, but that Dancy must also play. When Mara came, he was told this, and yet he was guilty of this insolence. If you knew these people, you would at once see pride, arrogance, and unblushing effrontery written on their faces. My sister is now, I hope, quite recovered. Pray do not write me any more melancholy letters, for I require at this time a cheerful spirit, a clear head, an inclination to work, and these no one can have who is sad at heart. I know, and believe me, deeply feel, how much you deserve rest and peace, but am I the obstacle to this? I would not willingly be so, and yet, alas, I fear I am. But if I attain my object, so that I can live respectably here, you must instantly leave Salzburg. You will say that may never come to pass. At all events, industry and exertion shall not be wanting on my part. Do try to come over soon to see me. We can all live together. I have a roomy alcove on my first room, in which 2 beds stand. These would do capitally for you and me. As for my sister, all we can do is to put a stove into the next room, which will only be an affair of 4 or 5 florins, for in mine we might heat the stove till it is red hot, and leave the stove door open into the bargain, yet it would not make the room endurable. It is so frightfully cold in it. Ask the Abate Varesco if we could not break off at the chorus in the 2nd act, Placido e il mare, after Elettra's first verse, when the chorus is repeated. At all events after the 2nd, for it is really far too long. I have been confined to the house 2 days from my cold, and luckily for me, I have very little appetite, for in the long run it would be inconvenient to pay for my board. I have, however, written a note to the Count on the subject, and received a message from him that he would speak to me about it shortly. By heavens, he ought to be thoroughly ashamed of himself. I won't pay a single kreutzer. 131. Munich, December 1st, 1780. The rehearsal went off with extraordinary success. There were only 6 violins in all, but the requisite wind instruments. No one was admitted but Count Seau's sister and young Count Seinsheim. This day week we are to have another rehearsal, with 12 violins for the 1st act, and then the 2nd act will be rehearsed, like the 1st, on the previous occasion. I cannot tell you how delighted and surprised all were, but I never expected anything else, for I declare I went to this rehearsal with as quiet a heart as if I had been going to a banquet. Count Seinsheim said to me, "I do assure you that though I expected a great deal from you, I can truly say this I did not expect." The Cannabichs and all who frequent their house are true friends of mine. After the rehearsal, for we had a great deal to discuss with the Count, when I went home with Cannabich, Madame Cannabich came to meet me and hugged me from joy at the rehearsal having passed off so admirably. Then came Ramm and Lang, quite out of their wits with delight. My true friend, the excellent lady, who was alone in the house with her invalid daughter Rose, had been full of solicitude on my account. When you know him, you will find Ram a true German, saying exactly what he thinks to your face. He said to me, "I must honestly confess that no music ever made such an impression on me, and I assure you I thought of your father 50 times at least, and of the joy he will feel when he hears this opera. But enough of this subject. My cold is rather worse owing to this rehearsal, for it is impossible not to feel excited when honor and fame are at stake, however cool you may be at first. I did everything you prescribed for my cold, but it goes on very slowly, which is particularly inconvenient to me at present, but all my writing about it will not put an end to my cough, and yet write I must. Today I have begun to take violet syrup and a little almond oil, and already I feel relieved, and have again stayed 2 days in the house. Yesterday morning Herr Rolf came to me again to hear the aria in the second act. The man is as much enamored of his aria as a young passionate lover ever was of his fair one. He sings it the last thing before he goes to sleep, and the first thing in the morning when he awakes. I knew already from a sure source, but now from himself, that he said to Herr van Viereck, Oberststallmeister, and to Herr van Kastel, I am accustomed constantly to change my parts, to suit me better, in recitative as well as in arias, but this I have left just as it was, for every single note is in accordance with my voice. In short, he is as happy as a king. He wishes the interpolated aria to be a little altered, and so do I. The part commencing with the word era he does not like, for what we want here is a calm, tranquil aria, and if consisting of only one part, so much the better, for a second subject would have to be brought in about the middle, which leads me out of my way. In Achille in Sciro there is an air of this kind, or Che mio figlio sai. I thank my sister very much for the list of comedies she sent me. It is singular enough about the comedy Rache für Rache. It was frequently given here with much applause, and quite lately too, though I was not there myself. I beg you will present my devoted homage to Mademoiselle Teresa von Barisani. If I had a brother, I would request him to kiss her hand in all humility, but having a sister only is still better, for I beg she will embrace her in the most affectionate manner in my name. Apropos, do write a letter to Cannabich. He deserves it, and it will please him exceedingly. What does it matter if he does not answer you? You must not judge him from his manner. He is the same to everyone, and means nothing. You must first know him well. 132. Munich, December 5th, 1780. The death of the Empress Maria Theresa does not at all affect my opera, for the theatrical performances are not suspended, and the plays go on as usual. The entire mourning is not to last more than 6 weeks, and my opera will not be given before the 20th of January. I wish you to get my black suit thoroughly brushed to make it as wearable as possible, and forward it to me by the first diligence, for next week everyone must be in mourning, and I, though constantly on the move, must cry with the others. With regard to Rolf's last aria, I already mentioned that we both wish to have more touching and pleasing words. The word era is constrained, the beginning good, but gelida massa is again hard. In short, far-fetched or pedantic expressions are always inappropriate in a pleasing aria. I should also like the air to express only peace and contentment, and one part would be quite as good, in fact, better in my opinion. I also wrote about Pansachi. We must do what we can to oblige the good old man. He wishes to have his recitative in the third act lengthened a couple of lines, which, owing to the chiaro oscuro and his being a good actor, will have a capital effect. For example, after the strophe Se la città da pianto e questa regia quella del duo comes a slight glimmering of hope, and then, madman that I am, whither does my grief lead me? Ah, creta tutta io vedo. The Abitovaresco is not obliged to rewrite the act on account of these things, for they can easily be interpolated. I have also written that both I and others think the oracle's subterranean speech too long to make a good effect. Reflect on this. I must now conclude, having such a mass of writing to do. I have not seen Baron Lerbach, and don't know whether he is here or not, and I have no time to run about. I may easily not know whether he is here, but he cannot fail to know positively that I am. Had I been a girl, no doubt he would have come to see me long ago. Now, adieu. I have this moment received your letter of the 4th December. You must begin to accustom yourself a little to the kissing system. You can meanwhile practice with Marasquelli, for each time that you come to Dorothea Wendling's, where everything is rather in the French style, you will have to embrace both mother and daughter, but N.B. on the chin, so that the paint may not be rubbed off. More of this next time. Adieu. P.S. Don't forget about my black suit. I must have it, or I shall be laughed at, which is never agreeable. 133. Munich, December 13th, 1780. Your last letter seemed to me far too short, so I searched all the pockets in my black suit to see if I could not find something more. In Vienna and all the imperial dominions, the gaieties are to be resumed 6 weeks hence, a very sensible measure, for mourning too long is not productive of half as much good to the deceased as of injury to the living. Is Herr Schikaneder to remain in Salzburg? If so, he might still see and hear my opera. Here people, very properly, cannot comprehend why the mourning should last for 3 months, while that for our late Elector was only 6 weeks. The theatre, however, goes on as usual. You do not write to me how Herr Esser accompanied my sonatas. Ill or well? The comedy Wie man sich die Sache dutet is charming, for I saw it, no, not saw it, but read it, for it has not yet been performed. Besides, I have been only once in the theatre, having no leisure to go, the evening being the time I like best to work. If her Grace, the most sensible, gracious Frau von Robinick, does not on this occasion change the period of her gracious journey to Munich, her Grace will be unable to hear one note of my opera. My opinion, however, is that her Grace, in her supreme wisdom, in order to oblige your excellent son, will graciously condescend to stay a little longer. I suppose your portrait is now begun, and my sister's also, no doubt. How is it likely to turn out? Have you any answer yet from our plenipotentiary at Wetzlar? I forget his name. Fuchs, I think? I mean about the duets for 2 pianos. It is always satisfactory to explain a thing distinctly, and the arias of Aesopus are, I suppose, still lying on the table? Send them to me by the diligence, that I may give them myself to Herr von Dumhoff, who will then remit them post-free. To whom? Why, to Heckmann, a charming man, is he not, and a passionate lover of music. My chief object comes today at the close of my letter, but this is always the case with me. One day lately, after dining with Liesel Wendling, I drove with Legrand to Cannabix, as it was snowing heavily. Through the window they thought it was you, and that we had come together. I could not understand why both Karl and the children ran down the steps to meet us, and when they saw Legrand, did not say a word, but looked quite discomposed, till they explained it when we went upstairs. I shall write nothing more, because you write so seldom to me, nothing, except that Herr Eck, who has just crept into the room to fetch his sword, which he forgot the last time he was here, sends his best wishes to Tresal, Pimperl, Jungfer, Mitzerl, Gilofsky, Catherall, my sister, and last of all, to yourself. Kiss Tresal for me, 1,000 kisses to Pimperl. 134. Munich, December 16th, 1780. Herr Esser came to call on me yesterday for the first time. Did he go about on foot in Salzburg, or always drive in a carriage, as he does here? I believe his small portion of Salzburg money will not remain long in his purse. On Sunday we are to dine together at Cannabix, and there he is to let us hear his solos, clever and stupid. He says he will give no concert here, nor does he care to appear at court. He does not intend to seek it, but if the Elector wishes to hear him, eh bien, here am I. It would be a favor, but I shall not announce myself. But after all, he may be a worthy fool. Deuce take it. Cavalier, I meant to say. He asked me why I did not wear my Order of the Spur. I said I had one in my head quite hard enough to carry. He was so obliging as to dust my coat a little for me, saying, one cavalier may wait upon another, in spite of which, the same afternoon, from forgetfulness, I suppose, he left his spur at home. I mean the outward and visible one, or at all events contrived to hide it so effectually that not a vestige of it was to be seen. In case I forget it again, I must tell you that Madame and Mademoiselle Cannabich both complain that their throats are daily becoming larger owing to the air and water here, which might at last become regular goiters. Heaven forbid! They are indeed taking a certain powder. How do I know what? Not that this is its name. At all events, it seems to do them no good. For their sakes, therefore, I took the liberty to recommend what we call goiter pills, pretending, in order to enhance their value, that my sister had 3 goiters, each larger than the other, and yet at last, by means of these admirable pills, had got entirely rid of them. If they can be made up here, pray send me the prescription, but if only to be had at Salzburg, I beg you will pay ready money for them, and send a few CWT of them by the next diligence. You know my address. There is to be another rehearsal this afternoon of the first and second acts in the Count's apartments. Then we shall only have a chamber rehearsal of the third, and afterwards go straight to the theatre. The rehearsal has been put off owing to the copyist, which enraged Count Seinsheim to the uttermost. As for what is called the popular taste, do not be uneasy, for in my opera there is music for every class, except for the long-eared. Apropos, how goes on the Archbishop? Next Monday I shall have been 6 weeks away from Salzburg. You know, dear father, that I only stay there to oblige you, for, by heavens, if I followed my own inclinations, before coming here I would have torn up my last diploma. For I give you my honor that not Salzburg itself, but the prince and his proud nobility, become every day more intolerable to me. I should rejoice were I to be told that my services were no longer required, for with the great patronage that I have here, both my present and future circumstances would be secure, death excepted, which no one can guard against, though no great misfortune to a single man, but anything in the world to please you. It would be less trying to me if I could only occasionally escape from time to time, just to draw my breath. You know how difficult it was to get away on this occasion, and without some very urgent cause, there would not be the faintest hope of such a thing. It is enough to make one weep to think of it, so I say no more. Adieu. Come soon to see me at Munich and to hear my opera, and then tell me whether I have not a right to feel sad when I think of Salzburg. Adieu. 135. Munich, December 19th, 1780. This last rehearsal has been as successful as the first, and satisfactorily proved to the orchestra and all those who heard it their mistake in thinking that the second act could not possibly excel the first in expression and novelty. Next Saturday both acts are again to be rehearsed, but in a spacious apartment in the palace, which I have long wished, as the room at Count Sale's is far too small. The elector is to be in an adjoining room, incognito, to hear the music. It must be a life and death rehearsal, said Cannabich to me. At the last one he was bathed in perspiration. Cannabich, whose name day this is, has just left me, reproaching me for discontinuing this letter in his presence. As to Madame Duschek, the thing is impossible at present, but I will do what I can with pleasure after my opera is given. I beg you will write to her and say, with my compliments, that next time she comes to Salzburg we can swear accounts. It would delight me if I could get a couple of cavaliers like old Czernin. This would be a little yearly help, but certainly not for less than 100 florins a year, in which case it might be any style of music they pleased. I trust that you are now quite recovered. Indeed, after the friction performed by a Barisani Therese, you cannot be otherwise. You have no doubt seen by my letters that I am well and happy. Who would not feel happy to have completed such a great and laborious work, and completed it, too, with honor and renown? 3 arias alone are wanting, the last chorus in the third act, and the overture and ballet, and then, adieu, parti. One more indispensable remark, and I have done. The scene between father and son in the first act, and the first scene in the second act between Idomeneo and Arbace are both too long, and sure to weary the audience, particularly as in the first the actors are both bad, and in the second one of them is also very inferior. Besides, the whole details are only a narrative of what the spectators have already seen with their own eyes. The scenes will be printed just as they are. I only wish the Abbate would point out to me how not only to curtail them, but very considerably to curtail them. Otherwise I must do it myself, for the scenes cannot remain as they are. I mean, so far as the music is concerned. I have just got your letter, which, being begun by my sister, is without a date. 1,000 compliments to Tressel, my future upper and under nursery maid to be. I can easily believe that Catherine would gladly come to Munich, if, independent of the journey, you would allow her to take my place at meals. Eh bien, I can contrive it, for she can occupy the same room with my sister. 136. Munich, December 27th, 1780. I have received the entire opera, Schachner's letter, your note, and the pills. As for the 2 scenes to be curtailed, it was not my own suggestion, but one to which I consented, my reason being that Roth and Del Prato spoil the recitative by singing it quite devoid of all spirit and fire, and so monotonously. They are the most miserable actors that ever trod the stage. I had a desperate battle royal with Seau as to the inexpediency, unfitness, and almost impossibility of the omissions in question. However, all is to be printed as it is, which at first he positively refused to agree to, but at last, on rating him soundly, he gave way. The last rehearsal was splendid. It took place in a spacious apartment in the palace. The Elector was also within hearing. On this occasion it was rehearsed with the whole orchestra. Of course, I mean those who belonged to the opera. After the first act, the Elector called out "Bravo," rather too audibly, and when I went into the next room to kiss his hand, he said, "Your opera is quite charming, and cannot fail to do you honor." As he was not sure whether he could remain for the whole performance, we played the concerted aria and the thunderstorm at the beginning of the second act, by his desire, when he again testified his approbation in the kindest manner, and said, laughing, "Who could believe that such great things could be hidden in so small a head?" Next day, too, at his reception, he extolled my opera much. The ensuing rehearsal will probably take place in the theatre. Apropos, Becca told me a day or 2 ago that he had written to you about the last rehearsal but one, and among other things had said that Roth's aria in the second act is not composed in accordance with the sense of the words, adding, "So I am told, for I understand Italian too little to be able to judge." I replied, "If you had only asked me first and written afterwards. I must tell you that whoever said such a thing can understand very little Italian. The aria is quite adapted to the words. You hear the mare, and the mare funesto, and the passages dwell on the minacciare, and entirely express minacciare threatening. Moreover, it is the most superb aria in the opera, and has met with universal approbation. Is it true that the emperor is ill? Is it true that the archbishop intends to come to Munich? Roth is the best and most upright man alive, but so addicted to old-fashioned routine that flesh and blood cannot stand it, so that it is very difficult to write for him, but very easy if you choose to compose commonplace arias, as for instance the first one, Vedrome intorno. When you hear it, you will say that it is good and pretty, but had I written it for Zonka, it would have suited the words better. Roth likes everything according to rule, and does not regard expression. I have had a piece of work with him about the quartet. The more I think of the quartet as it will be on the stage, the more effective I consider it, and it has pleased all those who have heard it on the piano. Roth alone maintains that it will not be successful. He said to me confidentially, "There is no opportunity to expand the voice. It is too confined," as if in a quartet the words should not far rather be spoken, as it were, than sung. He does not at all understand such things. I only replied, "My dear friend, if I were aware one single note in this quartet which ought to be altered, I would change it at once, but there is no single thing in my opera with which I am so pleased as with this quartet, and when you have once heard it sung in concert, you will speak very differently. I took every possible pains to conform to your taste in your 2 arias, and intend to do the same with the third, so I hope to be successful. But with regard to trios and quartets, they should be left to the composer's own discretion," on which he said that he was quite satisfied. The other day he was much annoyed by some words in his last aria, rinvigorir and ringiovanir, and especially bien mi a rinvigorir 5 eyes. It is true, this is very disagreeable at the close of an air. 137. Munich, December 30th, 1780. A happy New Year. Excuse my writing much, for I am over head and ears in my work. I have not quite finished the third act, and as there is no extra ballet, but only an appropriate divertissement in the opera, I have the honor to write that music also, but I am glad of it, for now the music will be all by the same master. The third act will prove at least as good as the two others. In fact, I believe infinitely better, and that it might fairly be said, fini coronat opus. The elector was so pleased at the rehearsal that, as I already wrote to you, he praised it immensely next morning at his reception, and also in the evening at court. I likewise know from good authority that on the same evening after the final rehearsal, he spoke of my music to everyone he conversed with, saying, "I was quite surprised. No music ever had such an effect on me. It is magnificent music." The day before yesterday, we had a recitative rehearsal at Wendling's and tried over the quartet altogether. We repeated it 6 times, and now it goes well. The stumbling block was Del Prato. The wretch can literally do nothing. His voice is not so bad, if he did not sing from the back of the throat. Besides, he has no intonation, no method, no feeling. He is only one of the best of the youths who sing in the hope of getting a place in the choir of the chapel. Ralph was glad to find himself mistaken about the quartet, and no longer doubts its effect. Now I am in a difficulty with regard to Ralph's last air, and you must help me out of it. He cannot digest the rinvigerir and ringiovnir, and these 2 words make the whole air hateful to him. It is true that Mostrami and Vienmi are also not good, but the worst of all are the 2 final words. To avoid the shake on the I in the first word, rinvigerir, I was forced to transfer it to the O. Ralph has now found, in the Natal de Giove, which is in truth very little known, an aria quite appropriate to the situation. I think it is the ad libitum aria, Bell'alme al ciel diletto, and he wishes me to write music for these words. He says no one knows it, and we need say nothing. He is quite aware that he cannot expect the Abate to alter this aria a 3rd time, and he will not sing it as it is written. I beg you will send me an immediate reply. I shall conclude, for I must now write with all speed. The composing is finished, but not the writing out. My compliments to dear Trezzel. The maid who waits on me here is also named Trezzel, but heavens, how inferior to the Linz Trezzel in beauty, virtue, charms, and 1,000 other merits. You probably know that the worthy musico Marchesi, the Marchesius di Milano, has been poisoned in Naples, but how? He was enamored of a duchess, whose rightful lover became jealous, and sent 3 or 4 fellows to give him his choice between drinking poison out of a cup and being assassinated. He chose the former, but being an Italian poltroon, he died alone, and allowed his murderers to live on in peace and quiet. I would at least, in my own room, have taken a couple with me into the next world, if absolutely obliged to die myself. Such an admirable singer is a great loss. Adieu. 138. Munich, January 3rd, 1780. My head and my hands are so fully occupied with my 3rd act that it would not be wonderful if I turned into a 3rd act myself, for it alone has cost me more trouble than the entire opera. There is scarcely a scene in it which is not interesting to the greatest degree. The accompaniment of the underground music consists merely of 5 instruments, namely 3 trombones and 2 French horns, which are placed on the spot whence the voice proceeds. The whole orchestra is silent at this part. The grand rehearsal positively takes place on the 20th, and the first performance on the 22nd. All you will both require is to bring 1 black dress and another for everyday wear, when you are only visiting intimate friends where there is no ceremony, and thus save your black dress a little, and if my sister likes, 1 pretty dress also, that she may go to the ball and the Académie Masquée. Herr von Robenegg is already here, and sends his regards to you. I hear that the 2 Barasanis are also coming to Munich. Is this true? Heaven be praised. That the cut on the finger of the Archbishop was of no consequence. Good heavens, how dreadfully I was alarmed at first. Kannebeck thanks you for your charming letter, and all his family beg their remembrances. He told me you had written very humorously. You must have been in a happy mood. No doubt we shall have a good many corrections to make in the 3rd act when on the stage, as for instance, scene 6th, after Arbace's aria, the personages are marked Idomeneo, Arbace, etc., etc. How can the latter so instantly reappear on the spot? Fortunately, he might stay away altogether, in order to make the matter practicable. I have written a somewhat longer introduction to the high priest's recitative. After the morning chorus, the king and his people all go away, and in the following scene the directions are, Idomeneo kneels down in the temple. This is impossible. He must come accompanied by his whole suite. A march must necessarily be introduced here, so I have composed a very simple one for 2 violins, tenor, bass, and 2 hautboys, to be played a mezza voce, and during this time the king appears, and the priests prepare the offerings for the sacrifice. The king then kneels down and begins the prayer. In a lettres recitative, after the underground voice is spoken, there ought to be marked exunt. I forgot to look at the copy written for the press to see whether it is there and whereabouts it comes. It seems to me very silly that they should hurry away so quickly merely to allow Mademoiselle Elettra to be alone. I have this moment received your few lines of January 1st. When I opened the letter, I chanced to hold it in such a manner that nothing but a blank sheet met my eyes. At last I found the writing. I am heartily glad that I have got an aria for Raff, as he was quite resolved to introduce the air he had discovered, and I could not possibly, N.B. with a Raff, have arranged in any other way than by having Varesco's air printed, but Raff's sung. I must stop, or I shall waste too much time. Thank my sister very much for her New Year's wishes, which I heartily return. I hope we shall soon be right merry together. Adieu. Remembrances to friends, not forgetting Ruscherel. Young Eck sends her a kiss, a sugar one, of course. 139. Munich, January 10th, 1780. My greatest piece of news is that the opera is put off for a week. The grand rehearsal is not to take place till the 27th. N.B., my birthday, and the opera itself on the 29th. Why? Probably to save Count Seo 200 gulden. I indeed am very glad, because we can now rehearse frequently and more carefully. You should have seen the faces of the Robinecks when I told them this news. Louisa and Sigmund are delighted to stay, but Lisa, that sneaking misery, has such a spiteful Salzburg tongue that it really drives me distracted. Perhaps they may still remain, and I hope so on Louisa's account. In addition to many other little altercations with Count Seo, I have had a sharp contention with him about the trombones. I call it so, because I was obliged to be downright rude, or I never should have carried my point. Next Saturday, the 3 acts are to be rehearsed in private. I got your letter of the 8th, and read it with great pleasure. The burlesque, too, I like very much. Excuse my writing more at this time, for, in the first place, as you see, my pen and ink are bad, and in the second, I have still a couple of airs to write for the last ballet. I hope you will send no more such letters as the last, of only 3 or 4 lines. 140. Munich, January 18th, 1780. Pray forgive a short letter, for I must go this very moment, 10 o'clock in the forenoon, of course, to the rehearsal. There is to be a recitative rehearsal for the first time today in the theatre. I could not write before, having been so incessantly occupied with those confounded dances, Laus Deo. I have got rid of them at last, but only of what was most pressing. The rehearsal of the 3rd act went off admirably. It was considered very superior to the 2nd act. The poetry is, however, thought far too long, and of course the music likewise, which I always said it was. On this account, the aria of Idamante, "Non la morte io non pavento," is to be admitted, which was, indeed, always out of place there. Those who have heard it with the music deplore this. Raff's last air, too, is still more regretted, but we must make a virtue of necessity. The prediction of the oracle is still far too long, so I have shortened it, but Varesco need know nothing of this, because it will all be printed just as he wrote it. Madame von Robenegg will bring with her the payment both for him and Schachtner. Herr Geschwender declined taking any money with him. In the meantime, say to Varesco in my name that he will not get a farthing from Count Seo beyond the contract, for all the alterations were made for me and not for the Count, and he ought to be obliged to me into the bargain, as they were indispensable for his own reputation. There is a good deal that might still be altered, and I can tell him that he would not have come off so well quarrel with any other composer as with me, I have spared no trouble in defending him. The stove is out of the question, for it costs too much. I will have another bed put up in the room that adjoins the alcove, and we must manage the best way we can. Do not forget to bring my little watch with you. We shall probably make an excursion to Augsburg, where we could have the little silly thing regulated. I wish you also to bring Schachner's operetta. There are people who frequent Cannabic's house who might as well hear a thing of the kind. I must be off to the rehearsal. Adieu. The father and sister arrived on the 25th of January, and the first performance of the opera took place a few days afterwards. Then the family amused themselves for some little time with the gaieties of the carnival. The archbishop had gone to Vienna, and desiring to appear in the imperial city in the full splendor of a spiritual prince, he had taken with him, in addition to fine furniture and a large household, some of his most distinguished musicians. On this account, therefore, Mozart, in the middle of March, also received the command to go to Vienna. He set off immediately. End of section 11. End of the letters of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Volume 1, by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, translated by Lady Wallace.